For most people, the First World War is associated with mud and the trenches and Flanders. It's about the image that we have on Blackadder or from reading the war poets. But there is a very different narrative of this conflict, how it influenced ordinary people's lives, how it was fought in the fields, factories and the kitchens of people across the country. For the last 4 years, we've been exploring ways in which ordinary people's lives in Worcestershire and the surrounding counties have been shaped by this conflict.
The popular portrayal of women in the First World War focuses on working women, munitionettes and land girls. The millions of quietly determined women who voluntarily gave their time to ensure the smooth running of a society at war are often forgotten. Yet they played a vital role close to home, working for the 18,000 charities set up during the conflict and on the numerous government committees and organisations that mushroomed as the war seeped into the everyday lives of ordinary people.
Here in rural Worcestershire and in the counties that surround it, women in their homes helped the war effort. Women's immediate response to the outbreak of war was to sideline the pre-war suffrage campaigns which had caused such controversy over women's role in politics and in public life. Pro- and anti-suffrage campaigners rushed to volunteer, keen to support men in uniform and occasionally even to don uniform themselves.
The Worcester Herald was quick to suggest in August 1914 that
we women have to think how we can best aid our soldiers at the front and their families at home. There is much we can do. There are clothes to be made for the men going into active service. I understand that flannel shirts are needed and that they must be cut and made in readiness. However, these are only suggestions.
The euphemism that men went to war and women knitted may be a little harsh, but in the first weeks of the war, the Worcestershire Daily Times certainly contained a number of accounts of women grouping together and busily knitting and sewing. As early as the 10th of August, women in Droitwich had a sewing meeting and there was an appeal by the mayor and mayoress which apparently resulted in the town hall being filled with ladies on Saturday afternoon making garments for soldiers at the front, as well as rolling bandages and dealing with other necessities. However, women's skills did not necessarily match their enthusiasm. Many misshapen and even useless garments made their way to the Western Front. Garments were not necessarily arriving at the destination they were most needed. There were rumours that some men were desperate for socks, whilst others were inundated with garments and throwing socks away after just one wearing. Women's knitting and sewing slowly became more regulated, and like so many wartime voluntary activities, it became centralised. On the 11th of December 1914, the Mayoress of Worcester arranged a comfort day to provide soldiers in the Worcestershire Regiment with mittens, and a local newspaper explained.
A special effort to provide the 3,000 soldiers now in Worcester with much-needed woolen mittens and mufflers. Tomorrow is the day appointed, and the Mayoress begs for contributions at the Guildhall on that day. By ordering a very large number of mittens, they can be procured at 1 shilling and 1 penny a pair, so that everyone giving this sum can ensure one of our local soldiers having warm hands.
Other women sought to volunteer for more active, less traditionally feminine roles and to don military uniform and drill. Women who had honed their public speaking, organisational and campaigning skills in the suffrage campaigns set up the Women's Emergency Corps in August 1914, which morphed into the Women's Volunteer Reserve.
The Worcester branch included local suffragette Lady Isabel Margerson. At a packed meeting in Worcester Guildhall in November 1914, it was explained that this new organisation aimed to recruit women between the ages of 18 and 40. They would be a disciplined body of women who could be used in emergency for home defence. The women would get fit, they would drill, they would cultivate the virtue of sacrifice for their country. The response was not universally positive. A correspondent in the Worcester Daily News wrote,
While fully sympathising with the desire of women to serve their country in every possible way during the crisis through which England is passing, I question strongly whether the best way to achieve this end is for women to enter actively the great military movement which is now of necessity sweeping the country. Whilst doing all in our power to bring this awful war to a successful end, let women band together, not as a force for war, but as a force to prevent the awful repetition of the horrors we are now facing.
In practice, the Women's Voluntary Reserve undertook a wide range of activities. They cooked, they ran canteens, they were caring for mothers and babies, they collected and distributed clothes, and they looked after the care and the driving of horses or motor cars. Nevertheless, the militaristic undertones of some of this and other volunteering work did not sit comfortably with the many women who had campaigned for the suffrage, arguing that enfranchisement of women would reduce military conflicts. Many women and some suffrage organisations sought to find voluntary activities which could bring together all women, whether they were pro or anti-suffrage, whether they were patriotic or pacifist, or indeed if they were indifferent to all of these. Mrs. Fawcett, the leader of the largest non-militant suffrage organisation, the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies, when she visited Worcester in 1915, encouraged women to undertake charitable and welfare work.
A letter in the local paper said,
It is to be known that the Society has suspended its ordinary political work for the time being, and is preparing to use the entire organisation of the Union for the help of those who will be the sufferers from the economic and industrial dislocations caused by the war.
When 250,000 Belgian refugees poured into Britain in 1914, women dominated many of the local and national charities, which organised their accommodation and looked after them. In Worcestershire, Lavinia Talbot went with her sister to Birmingham to make arrangements for 12 refugees to come to the village of Hagley. Other women, like Mrs. Edith Hooper, a market gardener's wife from Pershaw, helped the families and dependents of those in the fighting forces. She served on the local committee of Soldiers, Sailors and Families Association. Women ran the National Egg Collection Scheme, collecting and donating eggs for wounded soldiers and sailors. There were 2,000 collection points across the country, where up to 1 million eggs a month were shipped to hospitals in France and Britain. The Kidderminster Shuttle reported that the village of Chaddesley Corbett had collected 1,475 eggs during April in 1916.
women of all political persuasions and inclinations busily arranged whist drives, garden fêtes, Red Cross weeks, endless flag days, and fundraising theatrical pageants, music recitals or plays, to raise funds for charities such as the Prince of Wales Appeal for those in distress. They also worked to produce and preserve food and encourage women to work on the land.
Lady Deerhurst, whose family had led the anti-suffrage campaigns in Worcestershire, found a niche for herself in organising women to join the Land Army. She was involved in a successful scheme in Worcester to collect fruit and vegetables. She worked with suffragist Mary Packington, who was the secretary of the Worcestershire Women's War Agricultural Committee. Lady Isabel Margeson and her suffragette daughter Catherine abandoned their militant activities, including chalking pavements and petitioning the king, and instead put their considerable energies into encouraging women to work on the land. They purchased a canning machine so local women could come to the village hall, get their fruit and vegetables preserved, and even set up a day nursery in Barnt Green so mothers could work in the fields.
Pro- and anti-suffrage campaigners' volunteering efforts sought to improve infant health and welfare. A determination to produce healthy children to replace the many young men killed during the war led women to set up infant welfare clinics, run baby shows, and organise National Baby Week in 1917. The Kidderminster Shuttle reported on the success of one such baby show.
There were nearly 400 entries, and the judges declared that in point of excellence, every baby deserved a prize. No less than 30 15 shillings and sixpence war savings certificates were offered by the committee as prizes. The mothers with their little ones assembled at 2 o'clock, and the delicate task of judging was at once commenced. The judges were Dr. Brockett of Stourport and Miss Murphy, head of the district nurses at Worcester. On the whole, the results were accepted with equanimity.
What then was it that motivated these millions of women to volunteer during the Great War? For some, it was about fulfilling their patriotic duty, feeling useful, doing something which connected them to their loved ones. For others, it helped deal with their grief, their loneliness, or provided companionship. Many middle and upper class women took advantages of wartime opportunities and experiences to administer, to manage, to organise, to make things happen in the public sphere. And in doing so, they developed new skills and new confidence. The interwar years increasingly brought change in public life in Worcestershire. The landed elite were sidelined in favour of these new middle-class women who had volunteered during the war and had been voting since.